There we go. Hi. I'm Brianna Cruz, and I'm a sophomore, and I took a standardized test today, and it kind of sucked. So raise your hand if you've taken a standardized test and you haven't really enjoyed it. Look around. That's insane. And so that's why I'm going to talk today about why standardized testing is testing our patients. So Einstein once said, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So there's a fun little image. So that quote came from a man with an IQ of 160 to 190, but it doesn't take a genius to dissect it. So imagine that you're 6 years old again and you've been begging your mom for a pet. And after months of wearing her down, she finally takes you to your local Walmart superstore where the only available options are what are thought to be the cheapest and best pets, fish. So now you're at Walmart looking at all the fish and you see this beautiful goldfish, ironically coined for its lovely orange color. But you pull on your mom's shirt and point to it, your heart filled with the newfound love for your new fish. And on the way home, you stare at it in that plastic bag, conjuring up big dreams for your fish and its newfound potential as your new best friend. Your excitement builds as you pull into the driveway and you practically leap out of your mom's 2008 Honda minivan and, fish in hand, race to the door. Suddenly, your little brother, whose fish knowledge pales in comparison to yours, mind you, jumps up and snatches your fish right out of your hand. You, fearful of what this little nitwit might put your new best friend through, runs after him, but you're too late. Your little brother has dumped the contents of the bag at the bottom of the grand oak tree in your backyard and is cheering for your poor fish to climb the tree. You try your best to save him, but that little fish, knowing it can't possibly climb the tree, gives up and finds itself in its toilet bowl casket before its adventures could have ever begun. So, stepping back into reality, we're knowing we're not 6-year-olds with fish, but we're kids with dreams, and with teachers trying to lead us to those dreams too. On a day-to-day basis, it might seem like it's your A-push homework that is the inhibitor of your life ambitions, but on a much grander scale, it's the high-stakes standardized testing that is fatal to our education, and it has been since we were about 7 years old. To enhance this essay, I sent out an email to all the principals in the district asking for their participation in a survey about standardized testing, and I got 11 principals to send it out to their staff, and over 170 survey responses, so that was pretty exciting. And today I'll use statistics from the teachers about how standardized testing has affected teaching in their classrooms and in their lives. But among all these, there was also a comment section where they could comment about standardized testing as well. So among all these horror stories of anxiety attacks during tests and teacher frustration with the content of the test, one true message arose. Something needs to change, it needs to happen now. So, as a special education teacher from Orange Middle said, I think the content and length of these tests are ridiculously hard for students and do not accurately affect what students of that age should be capable of. A regular classroom teacher from Olentangy High said quite plainly, I think the material is inappropriate and does not measure their capabilities. The real reason teachers are supposed to look like this in the light of standardized testing is that they ignore that standardized tests ignore the countless talents students may possess and are ignored by tests. Additionally, in the words of the late education researcher Gerald W. Bracey, PhD, there are some things that standardized tests cannot measure, including creativity, critical thinking, resilience, motivation, persistence, curiosity, endurance, reliability, enthusiasm, empathy, self-awareness, self-discipline, leadership, civic-mindedness, courage, compassion, resourcefulness, sense of beauty, sense of wonder, honesty, and integrity. These types of tests attempt to measure everything that the student has learned within the year and condense it into the time span of 4 hours or less. That either means that standardized tests are only capable of skimming the surface on a wide range of subjects and therefore fail to accurately measure how deeply a student has learned in a class, or they focus too deeply on certain areas of a subject and ignore others. How can this possibly measure the priceless worth of student learning? Another issue with standardized tests is that they are slanted socioeconomically so that students from higher income districts will have a better chance of performing well. Of course, this makes sense. As the famous education writer Valerie Strauss said, standardized tests are, quote, unavoidably biased by social class, ethnic, regional, or other cultural differences. and unfairly advantaged to those who cannot afford test prep. I found an example test question from a 6th grade science standardized test that asked, a plant's fruit always contains seeds. Which of these items below is not a fruit? And the options were orange, pumpkin, apple, and celery. So most of us have been fed our fruits and vegetables, and we know that celery is in fact not a fruit, it doesn't have seeds, and if you didn't know that, you should really go to the grocery store. But, so the source of the question, as the source of the question this came from, reasoned, quote, what if when you were a youngster your folks did not have the money to buy celery at the store? What if your circumstances simply did not give you the chance to have meaningful interactions with celery by the time you hit 6th grade? Though this is a stretch, it reflects a potent point. Children who have not had the resources available to them to be exposed to certain elements in the home that might not be addressed on standardized tests will have lower test scores than children who have had resources in their domestic life to be exposed to these things. As a regular classroom teacher from Berkshire said, important to understand and realize, based on our district's wealth of resources, we will always score higher than districts with less resources. Resources do not reflect much. Now to a problem every teacher and child has experienced with standardized testing, the anxiety that comes with it. When asked if students experience anxiety on standardized test dates, as you can see, 44% of teachers agreed, and 49.4% of teachers strongly agreed. So you can see the pie chart, that's insane, that this many teachers realize that students are experiencing anxiety. So, as aforementioned in the survey I sent out to Olentangy teachers, they could comment on how standardized tests were affecting their classrooms, and I thought I would share some of those quotes because it's crazy. So, from a regular classroom teacher from Orange Middle, I had a student a few years ago who didn't finish his state test because he ran out of time. He wouldn't let go of the test and started crying uncontrollably, screaming, "No, please let me finish." It is heartbreaking to watch 12-year-olds become so stressed out over a standardized test. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to do well. From a K-2 teacher from Heritage, the anxiety levels beginning with kindergarten students are getting larger and larger every year. From a K-2 specialist teacher at Wyandotte-Run, I had a student one year who was literally breaking pieces of her hair off during a state-mandated test because she was so worried about not being able to go to the next grade. It's hard to communicate the importance of doing your best work and taking something seriously to 7, 8, and 9-year-olds without stressing some of them out. From a special ed high school teacher at Oasis, they hate it and so do I. From a 3 to 5 regular classroom teacher at Olentangy Meadows, I have had students throw up in the middle of a state test due to anxiety. And lastly, my personal favorite from a K-2 regular classroom teacher at Oak Creek that wraps everything up with a bow on top, crying, tears, vomiting. Multiply all these anxious feelings by 20,665 kids in grades K through 12, all at an age susceptible to standardized testing in Olentangy, and that is a lot of nervous and pressured children. The reason that these standardized tests are so anxiety-provoking is that they are high-stakes testing. From edglossary.org, a high-stakes test is defined as any test used to make important decisions about students, educators, schools, or districts, most commonly for the purpose of accountability, as in the attempt by federal, state, or local government agencies and school administrators to ensure that students are enrolled in effective schools and being taught by effective teachers. In general, high stakes means that the test scores are used to determine punishments such as sanctions, penalties, funding reductions, negative publicity, accolades, awards, public celebration, positive publicity, advancement, grade promotion, or graduation for students, or compensation, salary increases, or bonuses for administrators and teachers. If these tests are being used to measure accountability, determine punishments, accolades, advancement, and compensation, it's no wonder students are stressed out. Even after all this tension, it has been proven that high-stakes standardized tests do not even do their job in these categories. Tests, first of all, are supposed to show that teachers are doing their job, as in accountability, determining punishments, and compensation piece of their definition. However, this ties back to the previously discussed socioeconomic slant. Just like their students, teachers that come from properly funded schools are going to show that they are performing better than teachers from underfunded school districts because of their student performance on tests. To borrow a picture from the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, or the ACSD, suppose you're a principal in a school when most students come from genuinely low socioeconomic situations? How are your students likely to perform on a standardized achievement test if it's a substantial number of these test items really measure the stimulus richness of your students' backgrounds? That's right, your students are not likely to earn very high test scores. Does that mean that your school's teachers are doing a poor instructional job? Of course not. Conversely, let's imagine you're a principal in an affluent school whose students tend to have upper-class, well-educated parents. Each spring, your students' scores on standardized test achievements are dazzlingly high. Doesn't that mean that your school's teachers are doing a super instructional job? Of course not. This would be the sort of correlation but not causation situation. More often than not, teachers are doing their job and even teach the test, but due to reasons out of their control, students may not perform as well as their privileged counterparts, and teachers suffer the judgment because of that. Another thing that high-stakes standardized testing, by definition, is supposed to measure is accolades, or an award or privilege granted as a special honor or acknowledgement of merit. In scholarly terms, this is essentially determining which students should be placed in gifted classes. And this is something I can speak to on a personal level because I was lucky enough to have the resources, as I did at a young age, to be placed in quote-unquote gifted classes in primary school. And that affects what classes I am today as a sophomore in high school, and it's affected my decisions for junior year and senior year, and it will affect my decisions for college, and it's affected middle school and elementary school and everything. And what's absolutely mind-boggling to me is that there are people of comparable, if not exceedingly intellectual merit as me who do not think themselves so because they were not placed in gifted classes in elementary school, so they were not in accelerated AP classes in high school. I know straight from watching my peers around me that the categories they've been pushed into between gifted and Common Core, regular and honors, that high-stakes testing, standardized testing determines kids' academic paths at a second grade level and beyond. It needs to stop. The final thing that makes standardized tests high stake is that it determines the advancement of a child, as in whether or not they will advance to the next grade level. The grade retention most familiar to parents, students, and teachers alike is a third grade reading guarantee, 4 words that will make any K to 3rd grade teacher stiffen up. As a Wyandotte-run K-2 specialist teacher said, with Ohio's 3rd grade reading guarantee law, the level of stress for families is very taxing. Students who are poor test takers or have attention issues are identified as possibly not moving to the next grade level or deficient in reading, even if other research-based assessments show different outcomes. Fair Test, an organization dedicated to the fair testing of students instead of standardized testing, says that grade retention has repeatedly been proven to be counterproductive. Students who are retained do not improve academically, are emotionally damaged by retention, suffer a loss in school and self-esteem, and are more likely to drop out of school. This makes sense. If a child is held back from moving on to the next grade with their peers and has to relearn the same exact material from the year before, they're going to feel a loss of self-esteem and have emotional issues. And it's emotional time for the parent too, who might not understand why their child has not been performing well, but they might have just been a poor test taker. There are also a lot of other reasons students might not be able to pass a single test, and as this teacher from Orange's special education program said, this is one of my favorite quotes I got from that survey, I work with a population that scored poorly on standardized tests to receive special education services. Yet, they are supposed to pass a standardized test to graduate. That makes a lot of sense. So, we can combat grade retention by 4 solutions compiled by Fair Test. So first, we can have increased and enhanced professional development to help teachers meet standards. Second, school restructuring and 2-year student-teacher relationships. Third, targeted and timely supports to students available during the school day. And fourth, using a variety of ongoing classroom assessments that provide information to apply teaching. Above all, the most detrimental part of standardized testing is that standardized tests force teachers to teach to test. A regular classroom teacher from Orange Middle School said, students and teachers feel pressure for the students to perform, so as testing sessions come, teachers will just teach to the test so that students do well. This takes away from the actual learning and joy of school because only the tests matter. Teachers have been pushed into boxes where they are required to teach the test, which does not help kids learn or remember the information. Essentially, if we want students to retain what they are learning, we cannot continue to teach the test. Time and time and again, we recognize that standardized tests are not accurate measurements of student knowledge and that teachers are teaching the test. But what can we do about it? We need some way of understanding student growth, but realize that children cannot take the stress of testing at a young age and cannot take the stress of high-stakes testing at any age. So, the first thing that needs to happen in order to fix our broken testing system is to rid of high-stakes testing at any grade level. No singular test should be able to determine whether or not a child will move on to the next grade. Instead, there should be smaller, less high-stake tests that are teacher-created throughout the school year. After all, as you can see on that graph, 53% of teachers agree and 36.1% of teachers strongly agree that students perform better on teacher-made assessments than on standardized assessments. Standards for passing should be set by the school district according to what is available to them considering their socioeconomic conditions, and these standards may be then approved by state-qualified educators instead of politicians. This will also allow for the content and tests to be better adapted to fit what the student has actually learned throughout the school year instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach that state and national standardized testing attempt to take. Secondly, there needs to be a greater bond of trust between teachers and the state. One of the long-standing reasons for standardized testing is to make sure that teachers are doing their job, and if students improve, then they are doing fine. But if there is not a desirable amount of improvement, then the teacher's qualifications are questioned. If school districts and states feel as if they need to make sure teachers are doing their job, instead of putting students through hours of anxiety-inducing tests throughout 13 years of schooling, there should be a more rigorous hiring process to teaching, as well as better and more frequent district-based classroom evaluations, so it can be seen how the teacher's interacting with the kids instead of how well the children can fill in a bubble sheet. Finally, everyone should come to the conclusion that children are more than just answer sheets and the difference between A, B, C, and D. Their worth cannot be measured in a number 2 pencil bubble, but must be considered with their life skills, their ambitions, their personalities, and everything in between. Children are not fish that can climb trees, but they are the future of our society, and they cannot be pushed within the limits of the standardized test. Thank you.